So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our presenter, Dr. Barbara O'Neill. Dr. O'Neill is the owner, CEO of Money Talk, financial planning seminars and publications where she writes, speaks, and reviews content about personal finance. A distinguished professor emeritus at Rutgers University, after 41 years of service as a Rutgers Cooperative Extension educator and personal finance specialist, she has written over 160 articles for academic publications and received over 35 national awards and over $1.2 million in grants to support her financial education programs and research. Dr. O'Neill is a past president of the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, AFCPE, a recipient of the AFCPE Distinguished Fellow Award, and a Next Gen Personal Finance Fellow. She tweets personal finance information at Money Talk One and writes weekly posts for her Money Talk blog. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Barbara O'Neill.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate the invitation to be here today, and hopefully we'll be able to provide information to people that will be useful during this very stressful time. And as you can see on this slide, this presentation is one of many that Rutgers Cooperative Extension is doing, really to provide information, research-based information to help people with whatever questions they have related to so many topics we deal with in Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And one that we're dealing with today is the area of personal finance, as COVID-19 has affected the finances of so many families. So I named this presentation Navigating the Two Financial Faces of COVID-19 because there really are two impacts. Some people are doing as well, maybe even better than they did before, others not so much, and you'll see that as we go along. So that's where I kind of came up with the title. And just a little bit of background information about me. In addition to what you heard from Sarah, I did work at Rutgers University for 41 years. I'm a certified financial planner and have been so for 35 years. And as you heard, I am now a financial education entrepreneur, and I'm based in Florida. So I'd like to start out with a question, because I think it would be really interesting to have some discussion around this. How have you or any family member or even a friend been impacted by COVID-19? If you wouldn't mind sharing, if you have a story, I think it's so useful when we're teaching any topic to really have some good stories. So whether it's a financial impact, whether it's a health impact, if you have a story to share, I think that would be really helpful. Just make sure that your chat is set to everyone so that all 32 people who are here today can see the response. So Karen says someone she knows was laid off and is struggling financially. Yeah, and we've seen so much of that in this country in the last few months. In fact, there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day that was talking about the fact that there's going to be another wave of layoffs because companies thought they would be in a better financial state now than they actually are. So Adam is saying job and construction advertising has been affected. Mother-in-law and grandmother contracted COVID. Sorry to hear that. Wow. Melissa, our tenant had to move out of our rental property, and we now pay 2 mortgages and 2 sets of utilities. Wow. Okay, so definitely some financial effects there for sure. So let me start out by just talking about the two faces of COVID-19 as with respect to finances. First, we've got, I guess you could kind of call it the have-nots, the people who have been negatively impacted financially by COVID-19 to the point that there's a severe trauma going on out there. So we've got people who have lost income. It could be a complete loss of income. You're just laid off from your job completely. Some people have had structured furloughs where they're losing X number of days of pay over a period of time. Regardless, it's a loss of income. We have many people who are struggling with food insecurity, sometimes for the first time in their life, because food is expensive. People don't have the money. People are looking to get food provided in other ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Many people have depleted their savings, just trying to keep their bills paid and to stay on top of things. We're also seeing now the end of leniency provisions that were put into place in mid-March when COVID-19 first struck. So whether it's moratoriums related to utilities, rent payments, those sorts of things, those things either have come to an end or will be shortly coming to an end. And of course, they provided some breathing room for people financially. And now people are going to be struggling again like they were in March when they first realized that they had bills to pay and no income to pay it with. Eviction proceedings have started in some locations around the country. So there was a moratorium. It's ended. People are now starting to get legal notices related to eviction. Many people have had benefit access issues, so whether it's applying for unemployment benefits or other sources of assistance, in many cases the computer systems haven't been very robust. There's been lots of demand. People just haven't been able to get benefits on a timely basis. And then for some people, it's just been an inability to access social support systems. Either they don't know about social support systems, or again, some of the systems have just become overwhelmed trying to take care of so many people. So that's the one face of COVID-19, and that's what we typically see on the news each night, profiles of people who are struggling. But there is another face of COVID-19 as well. And this is the face that I often see where I'm living now in Florida in a 55-plus community. There are other Americans who have experienced little or no asset value loss. For many people who the only impact that they ever felt was the stock market and the downturn that we experienced in March and April, their assets have bounced back. So financially, they're close to where they were before the pandemic began. So they haven't seen any loss in asset value. The savings rate in this country has skyrocketed. You may have seen that the savings rate in this country was 33% in April. This is a record. We've never had savings rates that high. Even World War II times, it was kind of in the mid-20s. But for that 1 month, 33% savings. The last time I checked, it was around 17.8% for last month. So people have been saving. There have been people that have continued or even increased their income. Right here in Florida, I call it the land of the 4 Ps. So we've got people who are doing home improvements like crazy. You got the pavers, the palms, the pools, and the patios. People are just home improving like crazy. So the contractors that are doing this work, they've had some of the best income that they've ever had. They're so backed up, but the work is more than steady. It's just overwhelming for some people. So there are people who have actually benefited by virtue of the work that they do by the increased demand that has resulted from COVID-19. For many people, there have been decreased expenses. So people who are fortunate enough to have kept their jobs, who are now working from home, may have experienced some savings from not having commuting expenses, not having childcare expenses, although that can be a double-edged sword if the kids are home and you're trying to do some work. But some people have experienced some relief on the expense side of their cash flow, as well as having their income remain steady. And like I said before, it's been well documented that Americans during the past 6 months have been spending very freely on home improvements. So whether it's the 4 Ps down here in Florida or just remodeling a kitchen. People are at home a lot, and if they have the resources to do so, many have been spending freely on home improvements. That does not mean, however, that there are no impacts on people who haven't experienced financial impacts. What I've seen around here in my neighborhood anecdotally is a lot of boredom, a lot of fear, even survivor's guilt. You know, I'm so fortunate. It's so, people feeling bad for the others who are experiencing all the losses. I'm hearing a lot of people just talking about lost opportunities, trips that they could have taken, that sort of thing. And also, yeah, I'm seeing Karen say isolation, mental health issues. So those are very real too. We're going to be focusing on finances, but we need to acknowledge that there are other impacts as well. So what's going to happen? Well, this has been very interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, people were thinking, well, this is going to be very short. We'll deal with it, and we will have a V-shaped recovery. So we'll have a big downturn, and we'll hit a low point, and then we'll go back up, V-shaped. And then as the pandemic drew longer and longer, people said, well, maybe there's going to be a second wave. So then people started talking about a W shape. So we'll go down, we'll go back up, then we'll have another, wave of COVID, and we'll go down again, and we'll go up, and kind of like a W shape. And then the pandemic kept going, and things weren't happening very quickly, and of course unemployment rates were so high, and the people were saying, well, maybe we're going to have a U shape. We'll go down, we'll be down for quite a bit, and then we'll go up. And now the latest thinking, and this was just in an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that was talking about dividing the American worker. The thinking now is that we're going to have a K-shaped recovery. So people who have been barely financial scathed by COVID, they're going to just continue on their upward trajectory and continue to do well. And then people who've had all the negative effects are going to be on a downward trajectory, so more like a K-shape. So that's kind of what the latest thinking is as to how Americans are going to be affected. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about steps to manage in a crisis. I'll spend most of the time in this webinar talking about people who are in the first phase of COVID-19, people who are experiencing financial trauma. And then toward the end, I will have some tips for people who have not been affected very severely on their financial side, but still some things that they might want to think about as well. So let's begin with people who are experiencing COVID-19 as a financial trauma. The first thing that you want to do is to create a budget. And if you don't like the B word, you can call it a spending plan. That's fine. But a budget and a payment plan are going to be important. Even if you've never had a budget before, or you've done it very, very informally, kind of like in your head type of thing, now more than ever, it's important to get down on paper the income that you expect and the expenses that you have. Research has found that when people budget their money, they feel a greater sense of control. And what we need now more than ever is some sense of control. I mean, there's just so many things now that are out of our control. A budget can help you get a handle on your income and your expenses. So there's a resource at the Rutgers Cooperative Extension website for personal finance. You can download our spending plan worksheet. And it's a paper and pencil, but we also have an Excel version as well on the website if you prefer to do an Excel, where you're going to be listing your income and your expenses. And a budget is a projection for the future, but it helps if you've been tracking your expenses. So this is actually a very opportune date because we're doing this on August 31st. Tomorrow starts a new month. What I would recommend highly is that for the month of September, starting tomorrow, you track your income and your expenses. Even if you did this a while ago, it's probably different now as a result of COVID-19. So just make it a point for the month of September to track any source of income that you have coming in and the expenses that you're paying out. That will give you a good basis to project a budget from. Otherwise, you may just be pulling numbers kind of out of a hat, so to speak. So having that tracking done would be very helpful. Another thing that will be really helpful too is a bill payment calendar. So that's what's shown on the slide there, and this is actually coming from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. And this is one of their worksheets. And I think this is really helpful, particularly for people who have automated their bills, which is a good thing to do. But the thing when you automate your bills is that you kind of forget when they're due, because you're not writing a check every month, which is kind of like a reminder in your brain that, oh, the electric bill is due on the 15th of the month and the water bill is due on the 22nd. You lose all track of that because it's been automated for all these years. So what I really recommend is to use the CFPB worksheet so you can write down the exact days that your bills are due. It may not have been a big issue when you were working, you had a steady income, the bills just got paid, and it was fine. But now many people are living so close to the edge, and it's going to be really important to know when those bill payments come due, because you want to make sure that there's enough money in the account that they're being drawn from to not get into a negative situation and be, bouncing any payments and that sort of thing. So really important. So I recommend now more than ever a spending plan worksheet, which I have a picture of on the next slide, so you'll see what that looks like, and then also this bill calendar so that you know when your bills are coming due. And by the way, it is possible to change payment due dates. If for some reason all of your bills are kind of bunched up in 1 week, for example, you can call, for example, a utility company. It could be Verizon if you have a cell phone plan. It could be your local electric company, gas company, whoever it is, and just ask to have your payment due date changed from the 15th of the month to the 1st of the month, or whatever works for you. And that way, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. Most of them are happy to do that. They just make a one-time adjustment, and, one payment period might be a little bit longer until you get back on your new schedule. And that works out really well for a lot of people. So again, spending plan and bill payment calendar will help to give you a sense of control and help you to see on one sheet of paper what your financial obligations are. And then the second step is obviously to spend less, to try to reduce your spending by as much as possible. Ideally, reduce your spending by the amount of lost income, if that's possible. And that's not possible for everybody, but for some people it is. For example, I know colleagues at some universities who are on these partial furlough schedules now, where between now and next June 30th, they have to give up 30 work days that they don't get paid, so they don't work on those days. So they can figure out how much they earn in a day, and fortunately, those people are able to stretch it out. It's not like they have to use up all those 30 days all in 1 month. They can string it out over the next year or so, and they can kind of figure that out and maybe reduce their spending by the amount of income that they're projected to lose through their furlough schedule. Tracking income and expenses, as I mentioned before, and then once you have that tracking done, so let's say on September 30th, you've done this for the full month of September, and you have a good tracking of your income and expenses, then you can look at the expenses and say, okay, where are some places that I want to make some cuts? And probably the best place to go is with your variable or controllable expenses, the things that are not locked in through contracts or, just things that you have to do, insurance policies, that sort of thing. And you'll probably want to start with the non-essentials. And look at all the auto payments that you have too. Streaming services, for example. I just started getting Disney Plus like 2 months ago with Hamilton because I wanted to see it. But I went through their inventory and I cut my streaming service the other day because it's like, okay, I've seen all those things that I want to see on Disney Plus. I could always go back to it later if they have something else. But, it wasn't giving me $7 a month of value. So that's the kind of thing you want to look at, things that are locked in. Gym memberships. Many people aren't going to gyms right now. So again, you don't want to be paying for things that you're not getting good value from. And then another thing that's been proven through research to be effective is to just set a policy to switch to cash for most of your purchases, because it's been found through research that when people have a piece of plastic in their hands, whether it's a debit card or a credit card, they spend more than if they were paying cash. Because when we pay with cash, it's kind of like we feel a loss. It's kind of like we're taking that money out of our wallet, and it feels like a loss, and we don't like to feel that way. Research has found that too. People do not like to experience losses. So if you switch to cash, you'll likely be spending less than you would be if you were still swiping a piece of plastic. So spending less will obviously be a really important step. Number 3 is to prioritize. So you've done the tracking, you have a good handle of what your spending is. The next step is you want to break it down into 3 categories. Usually we've heard about needs and wants, but there's actually 3 categories that we have. We have needs, we have obligations, and we have wants. So let's go through each one of those. Your needs are things that you actually need for survival. Like if you want to survive, you need these things. So obviously food is key. Everybody needs to eat. And so that's the basic need, if you will. And then we need housing. We need utilities. If we have medications that are required, we need to be able to pay for those medications, and many of them require copays, so that's a need. Phone service, internet, health insurance. Many people would kind of put those in the category of needs. And then we have obligations. We'll talk more about those on the next slide, but these are things that you have some kind of contractual or legal responsibility to pay. And even then, you can put some of those in priority order. We'll talk about that next. And then wants are everything else. So those are things that are not needed to survive, and you haven't signed any kind of papers that you are obligated to pay. So things that might fall into the wants category would be dues to organizations, gifts, donations, travel, retirement savings. These are all good things. Not saying that we shouldn't be doing these things, but if push comes to shove and you don't have enough money, these are the things that are probably going to need to fall by the wayside. Not forever, but temporarily at least, we're going to need to kind of cut back or even just suspend some of those want items. So I was on a webinar about a month or 2 ago from the New York Public Library, and there was a speaker there from a credit counseling agency that was talking about this whole philosophy of needs, wants, and obligations. And they said that even within obligations, that's such a broad category that needs to be prioritized in and of itself. And what they kind of gave as a framework for doing that is you need to think about what is the worst thing that can happen to you if you don't pay this bill. What can be done to you? What are the consequences of not paying this bill? So they laid out this sequence, and you may disagree about what should be number 3 or number 4, but you can see as I go along that the consequences of ignoring things that are toward the front of the list are a little bit more severe than things that would be at the bottom of the list. So they suggested that as far as your obligations go, if you have any kind of court fines or fees, that's number 1. because they can come and, haul you off to jail. Not a good thing. Or they can just keep charging you more fees. That's not a good thing either. Child support, also very important. Again, not just because of the court fines and fees aspect to it, but also, of course, the moral aspect of it as well, supporting your children. Number 3 they listed was insurance premiums of different types. So your auto insurance, your property insurance, your life, and your disability. Maybe at some point you were making quarterly payments. You may need to contact your insurance company and see if you could scale back to monthly payments to give yourself a little bit more breathing room. You might end up paying a little bit more over the course of the year because they tend to tack on an administrative fee or something like that when you have monthly payments versus quarterly versus annual. But the most important thing when you're in a financial crisis is to keep the insurance in force in an affordable way. Number 4 would be judgments of various sorts because, again, you've got the courts involved. 5 on their list was secured debt. So, again, this would be things that are secured by collateral. So typically we think about cars that can be repossessed, possibly other big ticket items, and then of course the ultimate secured debt would be a person's home that of course could be foreclosed upon. Very high rating up there. And then taxes. They also listed that pretty high too because again, you ignore the IRS, you're going to be incurring fees and fines and penalties as well. And then toward the lower part of the list, and again, you prioritize your obligations until the money runs out. Basically, you've covered your needs. You're in the second category of obligations. You pay as much as you can. Toward the bottom, not to say these things aren't important, but again, as far as how much can be done to you if you don't pay them, they're not as important. Would be student loans, unsecured debts, like credit cards, that sort of thing, interpersonal debts, money that you might have borrowed from a family member. No, obviously you don't want to jeopardize that relationship, but again, your family members aren't going to haul you to jail or charge you fines. So again, it becomes a question of looking at what's going to happen to you if I don't pay this bill. So I'm seeing a comment here, Carol. Let's see, prioritizing consequences. Weigh the risk of not paying certain bills. Okay, so Carol's just mentioning your money, your goals, which is excellent. That's where that other worksheet that I showed you before came from. Your money, your goals is just an excellent program from the CFPB that discusses basic personal finance. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, number 4 is if you're still working, but you are maybe having a reduced income, your hours have been cut, you have furlough days, that sort of thing. This is where you may want to just look at what's coming out of your paycheck voluntarily and put a suspension on those things for a period of time until your situation stabilizes. So some people, through their payroll deductions, will automate charitable contributions, credit union deposits, retirement plan deposits, even over withholding for income taxes. This is a time where you may want to undo some of those automated arrangements and possibly change your tax withholding with a new W-4 form that would give you a little bit more money in your reduced paycheck. Okay, number 5 is to just think about ways that you may be able to come up with what they call side hustles or freelance or moonlighting income, whatever you want to call it, if possible. Not everybody has every option. And I guess I should kind of say we're going through 12 different tips that they'll give you for people who are in crisis. Kind of think of them as a Jersey diner menu. You walk into a Jersey diner, the menus are really thick. You can't possibly eat everything on the menu. I'm going to be giving different ideas. Not every idea will necessarily work for every person, but you'll just kind of pick and choose off of my menu, so to speak. So we've got, this is an option for some people. Maybe there are some freelance opportunities. Perhaps people who are not spending 3-4 hours a day commuting to a job, as some people did, may have time to be able to do some things freelance. I can tell you from personal experience, after I left Rutgers in January and ramped up my LinkedIn profile and started to pay attention to LinkedIn and post on LinkedIn, it has brought me at least 5 new clients in the 8 months that I've been away from Rutgers. So it's going to take some work. You're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to be posting samples of the work that you've already done in whatever field you're in. But if you think about it, if you really look for it, you may be able to find some freelance opportunities and be thinking about growth opportunities in the economy that we're in now, things that are doing well as a result of COVID-19. That's where some of the growth is going to be. So again, ramping up your social media use, working out loud, so to speak, is the term that they use. The only thing I would recommend is if you're still on somebody's payroll, but you're not working as many hours or something, you may still have to just abide by all of the policies of your employer and non-compete agreements and that sort of thing. So just make sure that all of those things are being abided by. Okay, number 6 is to stay insured. So what we saw at the beginning of COVID is that many employers, I'm thinking of like Disney down here in Florida, they furloughed their workers because their business basically dried up. They closed their doors, but they kept them on their health insurance for a period of time. And many employers did that because I think the thinking back in March and April was that this was going to be a short-term crisis. Nobody was thinking that this was going to go on for 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18 months. So every employer is doing different things, but if employers keep your health insurance going for a period of time, obviously you want to take advantage of that for as long as it lasts. What some workers were having to find out and navigate was how to pay their health insurance premiums when they didn't have a paycheck. That was a big thing down here with some of the Disney workers, is they were furloughed. They got their health insurance, but your premiums always come out of your paycheck, but then you don't have a paycheck. So they were having to pay an invoice basically to pay their premiums that would have come out of a paycheck if they had one. When their health insurance ends, that's where you have to look at other options. And most people are looking either at COBRA or the Affordable Care Act Marketplace. COBRA is a federal law that allows you to stay on your employer's coverage for a period of time, 18 to 36 months, depending on the situation. You have to pay the full premium, and then 2% more on top of that. So it's not free. It actually is costing you a little bit more than it would have been costing you, in some cases, a lot more, depending on how much your employer was paying overall. But of course, COBRA is only dependent on if the employer is still existing. Many companies have gone out of business. My brother-in-law, he not only lost his job, but his company went out of business. So COBRA is not an option for everyone. For most people, you're going to do much better by going with the Affordable Care Act, particularly if you qualify for a subsidy, as many people will when they've had a loss or a reduction of income. It's going to be a lot more affordable. So what you want to do is go to healthcare.gov, and there'll be information about how you can pick a plan. And they're all according to tiers. You've got the bronze and the silver, the gold, that sort of thing. You'll be picking a plan through your state plan, and many states go with the federal, and there's some states that have their own plans, so you kind of have to check what is the plan for your particular state. But you don't want to ever go without health insurance. You want to make sure that there's a transition from whatever you had with an employer to what you would have through the Affordable Care Act. And also think about other types of insurance as well. Some of us have been getting some discounts from our auto insurance company. I don't know about you, but mine ended this month. It was, I think, April and May we got discounts, maybe June, but I haven't seen it lately. So you might need to reach out to your insurance company. Now, they may not be doing the automatic discounts, but make sure you tell your insurance company if they had predicated your insurance premium for your car on a 2-hour-a-day commute and you're working at home, they need to know that so that your coverage will reflect the new realities of your driving patterns, whatever they happen to be. So make sure you're staying in touch with your insurance agent, and make sure too that if there's, just check with them, make sure that there's no other discounts that you may be qualified for, because in many cases you have to ask about the discounts in order to receive them. And then you want to take a look at your taxes too. If you're getting unemployment benefits, they are fully taxable. So in many cases, you're able to have the taxes taken out of your unemployment check if you click the right box on their system. If you didn't find that box or you didn't click it, then just make sure that you're setting aside money for your unemployment benefits, because that money will be taxed. And ideally, you should be sending in quarterly estimated payments. And what they did this year is they made the first 2 quarters, which were supposed to be sent in on April 15th and June 15th, they were postponed till July 15th. And then there'll be the 3rd quarter that's due on September 15th, and the 4th quarter for 2020 that will be due by January 15th of 2021. And you would send that in. What you need to do is go to the IRS website, irs.gov, and download a 1040 ES, Edward Sam, ES. And that's for the estimated payments. And there are little coupons that are part of that. You will download a PDF of that form, and there are coupons that you will send with your quarterly estimated payment, and there'll be information about the address that you would send it to, depending on where you live in the country. Also, complete a new W-4 form that I kind of alluded to before, and make sure that you're adjusting your income taxes to whatever your income is going to be for the year. The IRS came up with a new withholding calculator on their website about a year ago, and that's a good resource if you're trying to figure out how much to take out of a paycheck, or if there isn't any paycheck, just to try to figure out how much you might owe with unemployment, because that's, like I said, will be a source of taxable income. Another thing to think about with income taxes is that people who have lost a significant amount of income may be able to qualify for things in tax law that they never would have qualified before when they had a job. So things like the earned income tax credit, the retirement savers credit, things that you would have just written off years ago and said, oh, I don't qualify for that. Maybe you will this year. So just keep your radar up for some of those new things that might be able to help you with your finances that you'll be filing on your taxes for this year come the spring of next year. And then you want to make sure that you're protecting your credit as well. So make sure that if you are experiencing financial difficulty, that you call your creditors, call your utility companies, and explain that you've had a reduction or loss of income. Many people are going to be having to do this now because they had reprieves back in the spring. You know, they had the $600 a week of extra unemployment benefits, they had the moratoriums. So all of those things that were in the CARES Act that gave people some breathing room, many of those things have expired or will be shortly. So you may have been able to get along in some cases just through some of these CARES Act provisions. Now they're going away, so this is the time to call your creditors and your utilities, explain the situation, and talk about some ways with them that you can get some flexibility until you can get back on your feet. and talk about some ways that you can make reduced payments, possibly prorate payments, whatever it is that you can do. Just don't agree to anything that you can't afford, because they will try to lock you into something. And if you don't feel like it's still something that you can afford, just say, no, I still can't do that. However, I can do this, and then make that what you agree to. And take really good notes when you have those conversations with those companies. You know, get the name of the person that you talk to, the date and time that you talk to them. Um, make really good notes about any adjustments that they made, whether it's lowering a payment, lowering an interest rate, waiving fees. Make sure you really have that written down. Experts recommend that you confirm it either with a letter that is, postage, where there's a guarantee that they've received it on the other end, or an email that you get it all confirmed in writing that these are the agreements that you've made. Also, make sure that you discuss with them whether any of these concessions that they've made to you, delayed payments and the like, will be reported to credit bureaus. Ideally, you want to have it not be reported, but talk to them about it. Make sure that they say, no, we will not report this because you're making an attempt in good faith. But you also want to check. So under the CARES Act, you actually can check your credit report as frequently as once a week. Now, I don't know that too many people are doing that, but maybe once a month, not necessarily for everyone, but for people who have had some concessions made on their behalf because they've had trouble paying their bills, those are the people that are going to want to check their report frequently. Because again, you want to make sure that there aren't any negative repercussions on your credit. And the old rules about, doing it once a year, that's not going to help you if you're in a financial crisis. So that's why they made it once a week. But ideally, maybe twice a month, once a month, whatever works for you, you can check your credit report more frequently and make sure that there hasn't been any negative impact.
Okay. Excuse me, Dr. O'Neill, just before you go on to the next slide, we have a question from one of the attendees about what retirement credit is.
Oh, retirement savers credit. That is a tax credit that you get for putting money into either an IRA or an employer plan, like a 401k or a 403b plan, and it's income-based. So, people who may not have qualified before because their income was too high may find that they qualify for it. And if you give me a second, I happen to have my little cheat sheet here, and it may have on here, it has pretty much everything related to personal finance. Let me see if it has the phase outs for the retirement credits. I'm not seeing it here, unfortunately, but they pretty much have everything else on here. But it is income-based. I don't want to quote a number because it changed every year, but if you Google it, you'll find that it's income-based, and people with the lowest incomes get a 50% credit. So if they were able to put $2,000 into an IRA, they would get $1,000 write-off on their taxes. And then higher incomes, it's 20% and then 10%, and then it maxes out at a certain amount every year. Okay, so that's what it is. But again, my point is that you may not have qualified for it before, but you may, with the new, with your new financial status, qualify for it. Okay, number 9 here, step 9, is just build your human capital. This time when people have a little bit of more time on their hands, maybe they're not commuting, maybe they're not working as many hours as they had. All the labor force experts are saying that this is the time to be working on your human capital. And your human capital is really all the knowledge, skills, and experiences that you have that you can sell to an employer. So this is not the time to sit back, wait for the vaccine, and hope that the economy will rebound. This is the time to upskill yourself. to prepare yourself for your next position. There's a leading economist out there, Mark Zandi, who has likened the economics of COVID-19 to playing musical chairs. And you start the game with 100 chairs and 100 people. And by the time the music stops, there's only 50 chairs and there's still 100 people. So those 50 people don't have chairs. And many people are saying that's what the economy is going to be like. So this is the time to upskill yourself, prepare yourself for your next position, webinars, certification programs, even learning new tech skills, online courses. Figure out what the gaps in your skill set are and make yourself as marketable to future employers as possible. The number one question that interviewers will be asking is, what did you do with your time during COVID-19? And I can vouch for that. My neighbor across the street here, she has a boomerang college graduate. He graduated virtually in May. And he's been trying to get jobs like crazy and all these virtual interviews. Everyone is asking him what's he doing during this time, because people want to see people who are productive and working on their skill set. And then also the extra time, just savor that time. Anybody who's on furlough, employers will prohibit you from doing emails and phone calls during those furlough days. You know, the intent is that you are not to be working, and there are labor laws involved and that sort of thing. So that in itself will provide some extra time if people have those furlough days. Even walking, physical activity. This is actually the Family and Community Health Sciences webinar, so the department webinar. So take advantage of that extra time for physical activity, for personal care of yourself, spending extra time with family and friends, even if it's video chatting. I video chat with my cousins every second or third Sunday, and we get together on a Zoom, and it's just great. So just building in those things that you can control with your time. Home maintenance is good, and even financial maintenance is good. This is the time to prepare a spending plan, calculate your net worth, and do some of those financial management activities that people sometimes put off. And then reaching out for help is so important too. So if you need help, reach out. An easy way to do that is to call 211. It's kind of like 911 for human services, or you can go to 211.org, and information will be provided about local human services in your areas. Also, keep in mind that the benefits from agencies that you receive can free up money for other expenses. So food is obviously the ultimate need, but if you can get food from a nonprofit that has a food pantry or food bank, that provides money that you don't have to spend on food that you can use for something else. Just realize that agencies, government, and nonprofit are kind of overwhelmed, so there are probably going to be some processing delays and shortages. And also people may want to reach out for help from family members, churches, and other places that may be able to provide assistance. And then it's so important also for all of us to just be aware of all the scams that are out there. You know, one of the things with scams is that they always take advantage of current events. So if it's a hurricane, they're right on it, floods, and of course COVID has been, you know, a landmine for scam artists. So the problem with COVID, too, is that when people are in financial distress, there's research that's come out of Princeton University that confirms this, that when people are in distress, it saps out their mental bandwidth, you know, your capacity to make good decisions. It's reduced because you're just so worried about all these things that are causing the stress. So scam artists are taking advantage of that. They're taking advantage of people who are stressed out, distracted by all the issues related to COVID. So some of the scams that are out there, there's been a lot of phishing scams where they send you these fake emails or even text messaging. They're doing it now, and some of them are putting malware on devices. Some of them are just soliciting personal information. There have been scams related to testing or treatment of COVID. There have been appeals for fake charities, phony information about government benefits, and then sales of questionable products. So there's just a whole lot of stuff out there. Just remember, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I want to spend just a slide just talking about some tips for people who are not in crisis, probably have felt very little related to finances as far as an effect of COVID-19, but still some things to do to improve your finances. Beefing up your emergency fund. You know, people these days are talking about 9 to 12 months of an emergency fund. Used to, the standard has always been 3 to 6, although the reality, according to research, is less than half of Americans even have 3 months. But all the financial experts now are saying beef up your emergency fund, have more in reserve. So if you have the capacity to do that, certainly you want to increase your emergency savings. Investing in your human capital, I mentioned that before. Consider refinancing your mortgage. Mortgage rates are at historical lows. The rates aren't as low for refinances as they are for first purchases, but they're still low. So if you haven't done that previously, you may want to do that. Just expect delays. The systems are very clogged up right now. A lot of people are refinancing. You want to make some home improvements, perhaps. Make the improvements that have the high return on investment. You know, typically that's bathroom remodels, kitchen remodels, decks, that sort of thing. Get your estate plans in order. If that is something that you need to do, 185,000 people dying in the last 6 months should be a wake-up call to make sure you have your estate plans in order. Have a will, have a durable power of attorney, have a living will, have a proxy name to be your healthcare representative with your living will. Really important. You might want to assess your risk tolerance. So there's a tool that used to be on the Rutgers website. It was transferred to the University of Missouri. It's a 13-question investment risk tolerance quiz. You might find it useful to take that because it's likely we're still going to be experiencing a lot of volatility in investments in the months to come. Rebalance your investment portfolio. That's always a good thing to do. And if you're in a position to do so, get serious about philanthropy so you can help other people. There are ways that you can benefit tax-wise from charitable gifts, things like a donor advised fund, gifting stock. There are still some ways to do that. So check with your investment professionals if that's something you're thinking about doing so you can actually write off some of your charitable contributions. This year, however, under the CARES Act, anybody who makes a donation, $300 will be able to be written off on your taxes, regardless of whether you itemize or not, $300 in charitable contributions. And then I would just say watch the stock market. Some of the bullish factors, why we're seeing the stock market do relatively well compared to the economy, is that stock market is looking forward. We've had a very big growth spurt recently in the tech sector. Investors are betting that there will be a vaccine. So that's reflected in the stocks. Ultra low returns on bonds and cash investments. So people are saying, well, gee, where am I going to put my money and get some kind of return? And then also anticipation of government aid. So those are the things that are driving the stock market to do well. But there are some bearish factors as well. There's possibility of second or third waves of COVID-19. Remember, Spanish flu lasted for 2 years, from 1918 to 1920. Delays in the availability of a vaccine will be a bearish factor. The election, whatever happens, we don't know. Trade wars and possibly other risks as well. So, we just need to prepare for some volatility. Just want to share some resources that are available. The Wellness Society has put out a coronavirus anxiety workbook, some excellent resources there. Center for Financial Social Work has a financial reality coping ebook. Again, excellent, some really good worksheets in that. I write a blog each week. It's called Money Talk, and I've been posting many posts each week on COVID, so you might find that useful. And then the New York Times has put together this resource, a hub for help during the coronavirus storm. Also has some excellent information as well. So some final thoughts is, you've probably heard this before, but I think it bears repeating again, is that when things are out of control, the only thing that we really can do is control ourselves. In fact, there's a line in the play Hamilton where Aaron Burr actually makes a comment that the only thing that I can control is me. So the things that we can control are washing our hands, social distancing, wearing a mask, physical activity, checking in with our friends and family, our outlook, our attitude, our emotions, our saving, our spending, and our giving. These are some things that we can have a measure of control over. Then there's all the uncertainty out there. I actually attended a webinar that the University of Florida did a few weeks back on ambiguity. And the speaker just talked about the fact that we have to learn to accept uncertainty. And it's hard to do because we tend to want to know when things are going to happen, what do I do next? And COVID has kind of shot that all out of the ballpark there. We don't know when this is going to end. And it's really hard to live with uncertainty. But they were talking about the fact that you have to identify your uncertainty triggers, things that make you more uncertain than ever. Social media can be one, anxious family members, maybe children asking questions all the time, lack of sleep is another uncertainty trigger, because again, people are just not functioning at their best performance. And then she talked about the fact that we have to practice being comfortable being uncomfortable. And you know, that's hard to do because we're not used to being comfortable being uncomfortable, but it's something we're going to need to do. Focusing on the present, some of the principles of mindfulness are good. Anything we can do to manage stress and anxiety, exercise, relaxation, sleep, healthy eating, all of the things that the FCHS department talks about all the time. And then the last thing that they recommended was mapping out your plans on paper. So draw yourself, get a piece of paper, 3 columns, control, adapt, and monitor. And then under each column, write down everything you can control, some of the things that I just mentioned, things that you can adapt to, that might be, you know, working from home, having your schools at home, things that you're going to have to adapt to, and things that you need to monitor. And monitor might be things like, you know, state laws or local laws regarding, you know, mask wearing or anything that's kind of in a local thing. Again, if you can get it all down on paper, that becomes your battle plan, and then you know what you can control, adapt, and monitor. So I think at this point, I'm just going to end it here, see if there's any final questions and comments, and then I'll turn it back to Sarah to close us out.